The Empire had conquered 1,000 worlds across the galaxy. Their ships were massive. Their weapons were powerful. Their armies were endless. For 5,000 years, no species had ever refused their demands. Every race they met either surrendered peacefully or was crushed without mercy. They believed they were the supreme power in the universe. They had never known defeat. They had never tasted fear. They considered all other species as nothing more than servants waiting to be claimed. When scouts first discovered Earth, they laughed at what they found. The humans were a primitive species. They had barely reached their own moon. Their ships were slow and weak. Their weapons were simple. The High Council studied the reports and decided that conquering Earth would be easy. It would take no more than a single fleet. The humans would bow down like every other species before them. They sent their standard message of submission to every nation on Earth. The message was clear and simple. Surrender now or face complete destruction. The humans received the message on a quiet Tuesday morning. Within hours, every government on Earth had read the demands. The aliens wanted full control of the planet. They wanted access to all resources. They wanted humans to serve as workers and soldiers for the Empire. They gave humanity 1 week to respond. They expected fear. They expected panic. They expected desperate pleas for mercy. What they received shocked them beyond words. The United Nations held an emergency meeting. Leaders from every country gathered together. For the first time in human history, there were no arguments between nations. There were no political games. There were no selfish demands. Every leader understood that this was not a fight between countries. This was a fight for the survival of their entire species. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would fight. The response sent back to the fleet was short. It contained only 2 words, "Come try." The commander received the message and could not believe what he was reading. In 5,000 years, no species had ever responded with defiance. Every race they had encountered knew that resistance was hopeless. The commander laughed and showed the message to his officers. They all found it amusing. These primitive creatures did not understand what was coming for them. The commander ordered his fleet to move toward Earth. He expected the conquest to be finished within a few days. What they did not understand was that humans were different from every other species they had encountered. Humans had spent their entire history fighting. They had fought each other for land. They had fought for resources. They had fought for beliefs. They had fought for honor. They had fought for survival. War was woven into the very soul of humanity. Every generation had known battle. Every culture had warriors. Humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of destruction. They had developed weapons capable of ending their own civilization. They had created strategies that would horrify any logical mind. Humans did not fear war. They understood it better than any species in the galaxy. The moment the threat became known, humanity transformed. Old enemies became allies overnight. Scientists from rival nations shared their secrets. Military forces combined their strength. Factories that had been idle began producing weapons at incredible speed. Engineers worked without sleep to upgrade every ship and missile that humanity possessed. The entire planet became a single fortress. Underground bunkers were prepared. Defense systems were activated. Every man and woman who could fight volunteered for duty. Humanity had 1 week to prepare for war. They used every second. The fleet arrived on schedule. 20 massive warships entered Earth's solar system. Each ship was larger than a city. Each ship carried enough firepower to destroy a continent. The commander looked at the tiny human vessels waiting near their planet and felt nothing but contempt. He ordered his communication officer to send one final warning: surrender now or face extinction. The human response came quickly. It was a recording of a song. The song was loud and aggressive. They did not understand the words, but they felt the message clearly. It was a declaration of war. The first battle began near the orbit of Mars. Human ships were smaller and weaker than vessels. They should have been destroyed in moments. But the humans did not fight like any species they had seen before. They used tactics that made no logical sense. They sacrificed ships to create openings. They aimed for weak points that they had never bothered to protect. They used asteroids as weapons. They turned their own damaged vessels into explosive projectiles. They won the first battle, but they lost 3 ships. 3 ships destroyed by a species that should have been conquered in hours. The commander was no longer laughing. The fleet continued toward Earth. More battles followed. Each one was more costly than the last. The humans seemed to appear from nowhere. They attacked supply lines. They struck at communication systems. They used small ships to plant explosives on hulls. They refused to fight in straight lines like civilized species. They hid in asteroid fields and attacked from shadows. They sent false signals to confuse sensors. They retreated when outnumbered, only to return with reinforcements. They had expected a quick surrender. Instead, they found themselves bleeding for every kilometer of space. By the time they reached Earth's moon, they had lost half their fleet. 10 massive warships destroyed by a species that had never fought in space before. The commander could not understand what was happening. His forces were superior in every way. His technology was more advanced. His soldiers were better trained. Yet the humans kept fighting. They refused to give up. They refused to accept that victory was impossible. Every time they pushed forward, the humans pushed back harder. The final assault on Earth began on a bright morning. The remaining ships descended through the atmosphere. They expected to find cities filled with frightened civilians. They expected to find governments ready to negotiate. They expected to find a broken species ready to serve. What they found was a planet that had turned itself into a weapon. Every city had been fortified. Every street had been prepared for battle. Every civilian had been given a weapon and trained to use it. The humans were not hiding in fear. They were waiting with hatred in their eyes. Ground combat was something they had always dominated. Their soldiers were larger than humans. Their armor was stronger. Their weapons were more powerful. But the humans had something they did not understand. They had the will to fight until the very last breath. They used their knowledge of the terrain to create traps. They collapsed buildings on positions. They used underground tunnels to appear behind enemy lines. They strapped explosives to themselves and charged into formations. They fought with a fury that terrified even the bravest warriors. The commander watched from his flagship as his invasion fell apart. Soldiers that had conquered 100 worlds were being driven back by primitive humans. Every city they captured cost them thousands of troops. Every victory was followed by counterattacks that never seemed to end. The humans did not sleep. They did not rest. They fought through the night and attacked again at dawn. Their wounded soldiers refused to leave the battlefield. Their civilians picked up weapons from fallen soldiers and joined the fight. The entire species had become an army. Weeks passed. The advance had completely stopped. They held a few burned cities, but they controlled nothing. Every night, human resistance fighters struck at their positions. Every day, fresh human forces arrived to push them back. The commander sent desperate messages to the High Council. He needed reinforcements. He needed more ships. He needed more soldiers. The response from the council was silence. They could not believe what they were hearing. A primitive species was defeating the mighty empire. The turning point came when humanity launched its counteroffensive. They had been building new weapons in secret. Missiles designed specifically to penetrate armor. Ships modified with captured alien technology. Soldiers wearing powered suits reverse-engineered from equipment. The attack came from every direction at once. From space, from the ground, from the oceans. Human forces struck with precision and power that should have been impossible. Within 3 days, the remaining ships were fleeing toward the edge of the solar system. The commander stood on the bridge of his damaged flagship and watched Earth grow smaller in the distance. He had arrived with 20 warships and the confidence of 5,000 years of victories. He was leaving with 2 broken vessels and the weight of complete defeat. His species had demanded submission from humanity. Instead, they had found a war unlike anything they had ever experienced. They had found a species that did not know how to surrender. They had found humans. The message sent back to the High Council changed everything. It described a species that fought like no other. It warned that Earth must never be attacked again. It explained that humans were not like the 1,000 worlds the Empire had conquered. Humans were something new. They were something dangerous. They were a species born from war itself. The council read the message and felt something they had not experienced in 5,000 years. They felt fear. Earth celebrated its victory for weeks. Statues were built for fallen heroes. Songs were written about the battles. The United Nations of Earth agreed to remain allied. They knew that the might return. They knew that other threats waited among the stars. Humanity had proven something important during the invasion. When faced with extinction, they did not fall apart. They became stronger. They became united. They became unstoppable. Years later, human ships began exploring the galaxy. They found the worlds conquered by they found species that had lived under alien rule for centuries. Humans offered them something they never had. They offered freedom. They offered alliance. They offered friendship. The enslaved worlds looked at these strange creatures from a small blue planet and saw hope. They saw liberators. They saw the species that had defeated the Empire. They had ruled the galaxy through fear. They had believed that power came from domination. They had thought that all species would eventually bow. They were wrong. Humanity had shown them a different truth. Real power came from the will to fight for what mattered. Real strength came from standing together against impossible odds. They had demanded submission from Earth. They had expected slaves. Instead, they found warriors. They found a species that would rather die free than live in chains. They found humans, and they learned that some species are simply too stubborn to conquer. The galaxy would never be the same again.